important aspect of this speech, obviously. How do you get people housed? How do you make the best use of existing assets? Peter Churchouse, author and publisher of the Asian Hard Assets Report, with us, and of course Richard from Port Shelter Investment Management. Good to see you, friend.
Yes, good to see you.
Okay, I'm starting to feel like I'm a sycophant, and like I'm in a world of my own when I ask this question, but I'm going to do it again, okay? Because the expectations are very high that he is going to escalate government-led initiatives to increase public housing construction. There was a proposal from, was it Lee Shao Ki, that his foreign land in the middle of the middle of the hinterlands should be converted. He should be allowed to sell cheap properties that are really, really small. I had one suggestion that we need to really front-load this initiative to rezone and reline industrial property for like loft-style living, rather than tear it down and hand it to developers to turn into high-priced property. Let's go back to last year, what Donald Zung said. We have more units than are actually occupied. We've got a surfeit of 250,000 units. Why don't we go through line by line, check the public housing estates and see who really needs that kind of subsidization? Why don't we make sure that those resources are going to the right place before we start breaking ground and jackhammering all over town?
Well, I think the figures of 250,000 empty houses is not strictly correct if you actually look at the government's own rating and valuation data. Secondly, an increasing amount of urban residential property, particularly in the inner cities, is being used for commercial uses. So it's not being used for residential, it's being used for commercial.
Well, wait, is that legal or illegal, or is it a gray area? Because that's an enforcement issue.
It's a gray area,
not a supply and demand issue.
If you look out this window down here and look around Causeway Bay and Wan Chai, you will find residential blocks where the 5th and 6th floors all the way up are now being used for selling fashion, jewelry, clothes, and so on, when they're in fact residential properties. Similarly, you'll find in the industrial market, industrial properties are being used for commercial uses, as offices and retail outlets and so on. So there is a lot of grey area land use stuff here in Hong Kong.
Peter, let me bring in Oriel, Richard, into the conversation. Oriel, now I know what to do with that spare guest room. I can start selling ladies' fashion instead of leaving it empty like that. It's not generating anything.
You'll probably get bigger rent.
Were you designing that fashion too, Bernie? That's what I want to know.
Me? With fashion sense? That'll be the day.
Let's leave it to the proudest of this world. Peter, let me come back to you on the property side. You know, in doing a little bit of research around Hong Kong, of course, as you know, I came over there to visit last year. There's a lot of land that is available to be built on. Should they allow that, and should this policy speech have more on just how much supply they're going to be bringing to the market? I mean, how quickly can they put these sort of projects in place to affect the house prices?
Well, quite frankly, Hong Kong's got a supply-side problem and a demand-side problem. The supply problem is that Hong Kong's only been producing about half as many private sector flats in the last 5 or 6 years as it did in the previous 15 or 20 years. Similarly, in the public rental housing market, we're also seeing that production is actually lower than it used to be 15 years ago. So we've got a supply-side problem. The demand-side problem is something else, and that is effectively the fact that Mr. Bernanke and Mr. Draghi are pouring money into the world like there's no tomorrow, and a lot of that money is finding its way here and boosting property prices all around the region. So Singapore included, China, even Taiwan, and Korea to some extent. So it's creating asset bubble risks, and that's really the big problem that these guys have been addressing so far, which is really to curb the demand side. Now they have to increase the supply side. And as you say, it's going to take time. But there are things that they could do in the short term which would have an impact fairly quickly. And we alluded to that earlier with conversions of government facilities, conversion of industrial land to Soho-type properties, which we've seen in other countries. That could definitely help fairly quickly in the short term.
Peter, public housing...
Peter, what would you look at in terms of the... Go ahead, Bernie.
No, it's Richard.
Richard, I was just thinking public housing. The remarkable thing about Hong Kong was that something like 50% of our population was in public housing. Why doesn't CY just go out and build a lot of public housing for poor people as used to happen?
Well, I think he probably should, and that should be probably on his agenda, for the simple reason that there's a 3-year waiting list right now for public housing. When I first came to Hong Kong, it was about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. That waiting list has expanded dramatically as a result of the fact that prices have gone up in the private sector, incomes haven't really advanced that much over the last decade, and of course the wealth gap has widened. So there is a real demand and a need for public housing, rental housing, and I think CY would be well advised to really try and ramp up the public housing side fairly quickly. And it's a big political hot potato and would score him a lot of brownie points politically.
Just really quickly, Peter, because we're just about out of time. You talked about the fact that there are short-term measures that can be put in place. How short-term are we talking? I mean, how quickly are we likely to see an impact if, in fact, we do hear some short-term measures outlined today?
Well, if you're freeing up sites to develop housing, that's a 2 to 3 year program at the very earliest. But if you're releasing existing buildings, such as office or other commercial or industrial, to be used for residential use, that can be done within a matter of months, and certainly it's less than 3 to 4 years that it takes for the construction side from greenfield sites. So that could actually help to fill a gap. It's not going to meet the whole gap by any means, but it certainly helps, and it may in fact help first-time home buyers in particular, those in the lower end of the housing spectrum.
Okay, Peter, we are out of time. Been great to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us. And we are going to have more with Richard Harris after this.
Building cities like